In this example, we're going to work our way through the two-rail sweep form and all of the different options within the form to create components. We're going to look at two examples. The first is how we can use open rails to create a shape, and then secondly, we're going to look at how we can use closed rails to create shapes like the panel that you can see here. So let's just go to File, Close. So let's go and open an existing file. From the Two-Rail Sweep Guide project folder, we're going to open the Open Rail example, press Open. So you can see here I have a set of simple vectors that I've created in the software, and we're going to use these vectors to demonstrate the Two-Rail Sweep tool. So let's go and tile our windows vertically, and then to access the Two-Rail Sweep tool we need to go into the Modelling tab. And you can find that in the Modelling Tools second icon, and if we click on that, that will open up the Two-Rail Sweep tool. So the Two-Rail Sweep tool enables us to create a shape that's defined by its vector rails and a cross-section that we sweep between those two rails. So what we need to do is we need to have a minimum of 3 vectors. So we need 2 vectors that will represent the rails. In this case we're going to look at these vectors, and the rails represent the actual shape of the part that you want to create. Then you need a minimum of 1 vector for the cross section, and so this is the profile that you're going to sweep between the 2 vector rails. So you can have 1 cross section, or you could look at having multiple cross sections. So let's select our drive rails. So I'm going to take this vector here, shift and select this vector here, and we're going to use the option to use selection, and that's transformed those vectors into drive rails. I can see the start points for each of those vectors, and I can see we've got arrows going from left to right in both of those rails, and that's telling me the direction that the cross section is going to flow along each of those rails. I can see that one is red and one is green, and this is purely down to the order of selection. I selected the top one first, that's why it's red. The one that I selected second was the bottom one, and that's why that one is green. Next step is we need to add in a cross section. So the cross section needs to be an open vector. So in this case we're going to look at using this vector for this example. So I simply select that, we can see it's an open vector, and then we could simply work our way through the form. Okay, so here we've got various options for ways that we can actually control the shape that we'll look at throughout this tutorial. Then we need to choose how we combine this component with other components that we may already have in our job, whether that's going to be adding, subtracting, merging, or merging low. In this case we'll just go for add here, and then we want to give that a name that's appropriate to the shape or the part that you're creating. In this case I'm just going to call this one sweep, and then we could go ahead, press apply, and so we can see the shape that we've created there. And the actual shape of the part is governed by the drive rails that we used here. So let's just go ahead and close that down. So you can see that that component has now been added to our component tree. We have a grayscale here in the 2D view, and we also have the actual 3D model here in the 3D view. And so now we can treat this like any normal component, where I can select it again to put it into transform mode, I can rotate it, I can move it around, I can size it if I wanted to. And it's good to note here that once you've applied the changes in the Two-Rail Sweep form and you've closed that form down, this component has no connection between the vectors that we used to create that shape. So let's just take that component. I'm just going to press delete on the keyboard. We'll put that back in Z there. We're going to go back into the Two-Rail Sweep form. So let's look at the same set of vectors again. So I'm going to take this one, shift and select this one here, use selection, I'm going to apply my cross section here, come over to the form, This time we're going to uncheck the option to scale the cross sections with the width, press apply, we can take a look at what's happened there in the 3D view. So you can see we've got this shape, and we can see just by looking at the shape that we're maintaining the height all the way throughout the actual component itself. Now if I run my cursor from left to right, you'll see highlighted at the bottom that we've got a height of 1/2 inch that goes throughout the entire component. And the reason that we've got that 1/2 inch height is all down to the actual cross section that we're using. The height of this vector is 1/2 inch, and so having this option unchecked just maintains the height of that cross section throughout the two rails. Now if we were to check the option to scale the cross sections with width and then go ahead and press apply, and so we can see that the software is actually scaling the part against the width of the two vector rails. So where the two rails are further apart, we're going to have more height in our component, and where they're closer together, we're going to have less height in our component. And it's good to use this option when you're creating natural or organic shapes. So then we have two further options in this form, and we're going to look at those throughout this session. Then we have the option here to scale to an exact height. So currently the software creates the height based on the distance of the rails and the actual cross sections that we're using. Now if we use this option to scale to an exact height, for example if I check that option and then type a value of 0 in here and then press apply, you'll see that we have a flat shape there. And that's because we've requested that the height of this is going to be at 0. Now if we put this at 0.5 and then press apply, we'll find that the highest points of our component are going to be at 1/2 inch high. And again, let's try 2 inches there, press apply, and you'll see that the highest point of our component is now going to be at 2 inches high. And again, that's all down to us putting in the 2 inches height in here. So let's just undraw that option, and then the software will find the natural height based on the width of those rails. Then we have the option here to reset the shape, and when I press reset, it basically just resets the model. So now if I wanted to, I could make changes in the form here, I could select different cross sections, and if I wanted to clear the rails, I could use the option here to clear those rails, and you'll see now I'm just left with this vector selected. So let's just select those rails. I'm going to select them, use the option here, use selection. So we've already looked at how we can apply one cross section in a 2-rail sweep. So let's look at how we can apply multiple cross sections to our rails. So I'm going to select this cross section here. Now rather than going and pressing apply in the form, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to apply this cross section to the start points of the rails. You'll see I've got a check there that's telling me that I can do this, and so if I click here, you'll see that I've applied that, and I have these lines going through the two rails, and this is showing me how the cross section will travel between the two rails. You'll see that we've got an endpoint here. Now the red indicators on the rails matches that of the indicator on my cross section, and this indicator shows which way the cross section is going to be hung through those rails. And so if we go ahead and press apply, you'll see that we've got a rounded shape going from left all the way through to the right hand side. And so now we can look at applying another cross section if we wanted to. So let's take a look at this vector here. So I'm going to select it. I'm actually going to override the cross section on the right hand side here by simply clicking on that point there. Now you'll notice that that red indicator is now changed to a yellow indicator, and if I take a look at the cross section, you'll also see that we have a yellow indicator there. So this is telling me that this shape is going to be hung from this side from this rail here. So when we go ahead and press apply, we can see how that shape is transitioning through to the two cross sections. So we start off with the round cross section, and then it's going to transition into this angled cross section there. And so we can see where the anchor point of this cross section here is being hung on the top rail there. We can see that in the 3D view there. So let's just put that back in Z, and let's have a look at adding in a third cross section. So I'm going to take this shape here, and this time, rather than override the start or end point, I'm actually just going to apply it somewhere along the rail. So I can choose anywhere I like, and I could just simply click and I'll input that cross section. You'll see that we have a green indicator here, followed by this green indicator on our cross section, so we know it's going to be hung from this side on this rail here. And if we go ahead and press apply, we can see the shape that we've got there. So going from that rounded shape from this cross section here, transitioning into this ridge shape that we've applied in the middle of our part there, and then it transitions into that angled shape that we've got here on the end of the shape there. Now, the order that the shapes will sweep is purely based on how the software finds them as it sweeps along the rails. Now, not only can we control the shape of the part using the various options in the form, we can also look at using the right mouse button. So if I hover over the rail here and right mouse click, you'll see that I have various options in here to change the shape of my parts, and we'll look at those shortly. And also, if I right click on a node, you'll see I'm presented with a different set of options. For example, here I can look at deleting the cross section, and that will just mean that it's no longer part of our selection. So I'm just going to delete that cross section. You'll see it's deleted that from the 2D view. Now when I go ahead and press apply to update that, we should see now in the 3D view it's removed the ridges there, and we're just left with the round shape transitioning into that angled shape that we have there. And then if we wanted to, we could look at swapping over one of the cross sections for a new cross section, whereby we simply select the cross section we want to use and just override the node here. So just simply click, and you'll see it's now updated that in the 2D view. So when I go ahead and press apply, you'll see that our shape is now transitioning from the round shape into the ridge shape that we've got on the end there. Another thing that we can do whilst in the two rail sweep form is to alter the shape of the rails and the cross sections, and we can change this without actually having to come out of the two rail sweep form. So let's just reset that model. We can see that the software has retained the information that we originally had in there. So we've got our cross sections at this point here and the cross section at this point here. Now, to alter the shape of our rails or cross sections, we just simply go into node edit mode. So if I just click into the white space and then press N on the keyboard, you'll see that I'm now in node edit mode. And what I can do is I can come into my rails and I can just alter the shape of those. I could look at inserting a new point, so right click to insert a new point, and you'll see that we're just changing the shape of the rail. Do that to the cross section as well, so I'm just going to select those nodes there, and using the up arrow key, I'm just going to bring that shape up. So you can see that we've changed the shape of both the rails and one of these cross sections here. And so to come out of node edit mode, I simply right click into the white space so that we're back into normal selection mode. And then we can use this option here to reselect the rails, and the software will remember the vectors that it had selected before in terms of the rails and the cross sections. And if we go ahead now and press apply, we'll see that it creates a new shape based on the vectors that we had edited. Let's take this triangular shape here. I'm just going to apply that somewhere along this rail. Okay, so I'm going to put that in there. Now we can also look at altering the position of the cross-section's start point and end points once they've been inserted to our rails. For example, I could take this point here and I could just drag that over there, and I could take this point over here and drag that over there. And when I go ahead and press apply, you'll see that those changes have been updated there in the 3D view. Now we can also look at moving the cross sections at the ends of our rails. For example, let's take this one here. I'm going to take that point, I'm just going to move that over to the left side of the rail there. And we're going to go ahead and press apply. And so you can see that the software has took that information and it will still sweep the cross sections between the two rails, and these lines are a good indication of how the shapes will flow through the rails. Even though we're not actually completing the bottom rail, we get a component based on where the last cross section is positioned. And so you can see that we have lots of control over the shapes that we can make here. And so if I wanted to save this, I could go ahead, give that a name, call that one sweep, press apply, and then if I wanted to create a new two-rail sweep, I could use the option here to start a new component. And so then I can select my other vectors for my new two-rail sweep. So I'm going to take these two, use selection, and use this cross section here, give that a name, I'm going to call this one sweep 2, press apply, you can see it's been added there, and then I could just simply close that form down. And there we can see our two components that we created there using the two-rail sweep. So let's just hold down Shift to select both of those components, right mouse click, use the option here to delete those components, put that back in Z. So let's have a look at some further options we can use to control the shape whilst in the two-rail sweep mode. So we're going to go into the two-rail sweep tool and select this vector here, Shift and select this vector here, use the option use selection. Now I'm going to take this cross section here and I'm just going to apply that to the start point there. Then we're going to uncheck scale cross sections with width, give that a name, I'm going to call this one sweep, and then we could go ahead and press apply. Okay, so if we have a look in the 3D view there, we can see how this shape is being hung along the rail. You can see the red indicator there and the red indicators on the top rail here, and so we can see that shape and we can see the result of that here in the 3D view. Now if I wanted to swap that over so that this point of our cross section was hanging from the bottom rail, then what I could do is reset the shape, clear the rails, and then reselect them by selecting the bottom one first and then selecting the top one second, and then that would swap that order over. Or what I could do is I could simply right click on the rail here and use the option to swap rail order. So we can see now we have the green rail along the top, red along the bottom, and I can see that my indicator is going to hang from this rail here, so that when I go ahead and press apply, it swaps that over for me, and we can see the result of that there in the 3D view. So let's just put that back in Z. So let's just right click on the rail, I'm just going to swap that back, so swap rail order, and we could go ahead and press apply there. So let's have a look at some of the other options. So if we right click here, you'll see we've got the first option is to reverse the rail, and you'd use this if your arrows weren't pointing in the same direction as each other. So just to demonstrate this, I'm just going to reverse the rail here, and so we can see the red rail is now going from right to left and the green rail is going from left to right. You can also see in the 2D view we've got this twisted effect, and the 2D view is always a good indicator of the flow of the cross section between the two rails. Let's just go ahead and press apply to see how that looks. And so we can see in the 3D view there that we've got a very unuseful shape. And that's all down to the start point of this cross section hanging off the right hand side of the red rail, travelling from right to left, and the end point of our cross section is hanging off the left hand side of the green rail, travelling from left to right. And so as the cross section travels between the rails, we're getting this twisted effect that we can see here in the 3D view. And so it's good to know how to alter this, as you may come across this kind of situation, as it's all dependent on where the vectors started from, or the start points when drawing the vectors initially. It's also worth noting that the 2D view is a very good indicator of this before you go ahead and press apply, judging by the arrows on the rails and the lines that you're seeing in the 2D view as well. So let's just right click on this rail, use the option to reverse the rail, and again we can see how handy the 2D view is at showing us the preview of how that shape's going to transition between the two rails. So then I could just go ahead and press apply there. We'll just put that in Z. So then we have this option here to sweep between the spans, and this option can be used when applying more than one cross section to our rails. And this will only work if each one of our cross sections has the same number of spans. And so what the software will do, it will sweep between each span in order for you to control the shape. So let's just reset this shape here, and then we're just going to click into the white space here, and then I'm just going to press N on the keyboard to go into node edit mode. And so we can see that our triangle here has two spans. We've got a node, one span, another node, and our second span. If we select the curve here, we've got our node, one span here, another node, and the second span there. So let's just click into the white space there, right click to come out of node edit mode. I'm going to use the option here to reselect the rails. So at the moment we've just got this one cross section travelling from start to end. Now we're going to look at adding in the curve cross section. I'm just going to apply that to the middle there. And we're going to make sure that the sweep between spans is checked, and then we could go ahead and press apply. So if we take a look in the 3D view here, we can see how the shape is transitioning through each of the spans there. So we can see this shape here is blending nicely into this side of our cross section that we have here, this rounded shape, and then again it's blending nicely back into the back of that angled shape that we have there. And the same applies to this side of our shape here, whereby we've got this shape coming through the end, and then it's blending nicely into that rounded shape and then coming back out to that angled shape that we can see here. So let's take a look at how our part would look if we didn't have this option checked. So we're going to uncheck sweep between the spans, press apply, and then we could take a look at how that looks in the 3D view. And so what the software's done, it takes the cross sections and it just transitions them linearly without worrying about those spans. And so if we just switch that back on and press apply, we can see how it's blending into each of the spans there. And this only works when we have cross sections with the same number of spans in them. So let's take this cross section here. Now we can clearly see that this has more than two spans in this cross section. So I'm going to select that and we're just going to apply that to the endpoint over here. Now you'll notice that we have these red numbers appear under each one of our selected cross sections, and these numbers indicate to me how many spans are actually in that cross section. So we know there's 2 in this one, 2 in this one, and the software's telling me there's actually 4 spans in this cross section over here. And so when you see the numbers under each of these cross sections, it doesn't matter whether sweep between spans is checked or not, as it can't perform the task when we've got a different number of spans in some of the cross sections, and so it'll just default to sweeping the part linearly. So let's just go ahead and press apply just to see how that looks, and we can see how it's linearly transitioning from the angled shape into that rounded shape into the ridge shape on the end there. And so if you can see the numbers underneath the cross sections there, the software is going to ignore the option to sweep between spans. If you don't see the numbers, then you can use the option here to sweep between spans. So let's just reset that shape, and then we're going to just look at clearing those rails. Now we're going to look at how the software controls how the shape flows through each of the cross sections. So let's go and take this vector here, shift and select this vector here, use selection, then we're going to apply my cross section. So I'm going to apply a rounded shape between the start and end point, and then we're going to apply the angled shape is somewhere in the centre here. Then we're going to go ahead and press apply, and we're just going to take a look at that up the y-axis. And so you can see that we've got this wave or bell curve shape here. And if you take a look at the transition, we can see coming in from the curved shape, we're going smoothly up to the angled shape at the top here. Nice smooth transition between the two. And then at the top here, we're smoothly going down into the curved cross section on the right hand side. Now we have the ability to control the smoothness of these transitions. And so to do that, what we can do is we can come over to any of our cross sections, and if we right click on the node, you'll see that we have the option here to smooth. It's currently checked here. Now if we uncheck that, so select it to uncheck it, and then we could go ahead and press apply, and you'll see what happened here is that we now have a straight transition from our first cross section going up straight, then into a smooth transition at the top here where we meet the second cross section, going back out into another smooth transition as we meet the third cross section. Okay, very subtle difference here. Let's have a look at doing the same to the middle cross section. So we're going to right click on this node here, check that there, press apply, and so you'll see now we're going from a straight here, going up in a straight motion to the top of our cross section here, and then coming down into a smooth transition, blending into the curve shape on the right hand side. Again, we could do the same for the right there, so let's right click on that cross section, uncheck smooth, press apply, and you can see now how we're transitioning between each of those cross sections. So we're going up from this point here straight into the angled profile, straight down, straight in to the curved profile there. We could undo those, so I could simply come back, right click to smooth and press apply, and then right click, smooth, press apply. You can see we're coming into nice smooth transitions now. Right click on this one here, smooth, and then we could go ahead and press apply. And you can see that even though we just created very subtle differences, it's just another way for us to control the shape that we're creating here. So let's just close this down. I'm actually going to close the file down. We're going to open up another example. So let's open an existing file. From the project folder, we're going to open the closed rail example, press open, and we're going to look at some other features when using the two-rail sweep tool. And so we've seen lots of examples where we've looked at open vector rails. Now we're going to look at some examples of closed vector rails. So now I'm going to take this vector here and we're going to create an offset of this vector for our second rail. So let's go to offset vectors. I'm going to offset that outwards by 1 inch. I'm going to make sure that I check this option to create sharp offset corners. Press offset, close that down. You see that I now have two vectors that represent my rails. So now let's go and tile our windows so I can see the 2D and the 3D view into the Modeling tab, into the two-rail sweep form. I'm going to select this vector here, shift and select the inner vector, say use selection, so that's created my rails. Then I'm going to take my cross section here and just apply that to the start point there. And so we can see straight away here in the 2D view that I have a lot of visual clues as to the problems that I'm going to have with this shape if I went ahead and pressed apply. So we can see that our cross section is being stretched from the start point of the outer rail here to the start point of the inner rail over here. And it's very important that when we're working with closed rails that the start points are in coincident positions, at least relative to each other on the rails. And so what I could do is I could go into node edit mode to change the start point of the inner rail here, or I could simply go over to the corner, hover over it, right click and use the option here to make start point. So let's apply that cross section to those start points there. And again we can still see, looking in the 2D view, we've got all of these lines crossing through the frame shape here. And the reason for that is if we take a look at the outer rail, we can see the direction coming from the start point here. We're going round the shape in an anti-clockwise direction. And then the rail on the inside, this green one, from the start point here, we're travelling in the opposite direction, so we're coming round in a clockwise motion here. And in order for this to work, we need to make sure that they're travelling in the same direction. So if we just right click over any one of these rails, we could use the option here to reverse the rail. And so straight away in the 2D view that looks a lot better. So let's give this component a name. We're going to call this one frame. Go ahead and press apply. And we can take a look at that in the 3D view. So you can see that we've got some strange effects where it looks as though the cross section's being twisted as it gets to these corners. And so what's happening here is the cross section is travelling between the two rails, and you can imagine it being like two cars going around a racetrack. Now they have to start and finish at exactly the same time, and so to do that the outer car has to travel a lot faster in order for it to stay in line with the car on the green track. And the reason for that is simply that the red track is much larger than the green track that we've got in the centre there. And so what's happening is the shape is becoming out of sync as it's being swept around the two rails. And so we can help ourselves by adding in more copies of the cross section at each one of these corners. Now luckily we designed this so that both vectors have the same number of nodes. So what I could do is just right click on the node here and use the option to add to all rail nodes. And so it's applied that cross section to all of those corners. So when I go ahead and press apply, you'll see now in the 3D view we have nice mitered corners there. Now it's worth noting here that option to add to all rail nodes wouldn't work if you had different number of nodes between the two rails. So let's just close this down, and then we're just going to take that frame, we're just going to delete it, and we're going to look at an example of this. So let's select this vector here. We're going to go into node edit mode, and we're going to look at inserting a few extra nodes to this vector here. So I'm going to right click, insert a point, right click, insert a point, right click, insert a point. So you can see I've added 3 extra nodes to the outer vector here. Let's put that back into normal selection mode. Then we're going to go into the two rail sweep tool and select the outer rail, shift and select the inner rail, use selection, and then we're going to apply this cross section. We're going to apply it to the start point there. Go ahead and press apply. And so you can see that twisting effect there. And then so if we go over to the node over here and right click, you'll see the option to add to all rail nodes has been greyed out, and that's because we added in the extra nodes, and this only works if the two rails have the same number of nodes. So what we'd need to do here is we need to look at manually adding in those cross sections at each one of those corners. And so we can come over to this corner here and just hover over the node and just check that there. So just click in, we'll just zoom in just to check that we're actually at the corner, and we could just snap that in position. We can see that's in position there. Come over to this corner here and we're just going to click there and then drag that node into the corner there. We're also going to look at clicking there, then we're going to snap to that node there, over to this side, so click there, snap to the corner, last one, click here, and then we're going to snap to that point. Use the option here to zoom to fit, press apply, and you can see that we now have nice mitered corners there, now that we've manually added in the cross section to all of those points. So now we can give this a name, we'll call this one frame, press apply, and then we can just simply close that form down. So let's just take a look at our frame in the 3D view. I'm going to put it in ISO view. Now I can see, looking at the part here, I don't have a vertical edge that I was expecting on the inside of the frame here. And what we do have is a very small flat shape. Now if I select the cross section that we use to sweep between the two rails, you'll see at the bottom highlighted there, it's showing me that the height of this vector is 1/2 inch. Now if I come over and hover over the frame, I can see the Z values are showing just over 0.1, and if I select that component and go into the properties there, we can see that its highest point is at 0.1216, which is nowhere near the 1/2 inch height of the vector that I have. So let's take a closer look at our cross section. So if we just zoom in, okay, so we can see the cross section's start point and end point. And so when it's attaching the start point to one rail and the other point to another rail, what we're actually seeing is, if I just go into the polyline tool, if I snap to that point there and snap to that point there, now imagine this line is actually our modelling plane, and it's this shape, this cross section, that we're actually getting there, and that's why we're seeing such a shallow shape in here. Now when you draw cross-section shapes, draw them to the shape that you would like to see them, as if you were to cut through the material. And so in this case, what I need to do is I need to have a leg that's going to sit on this side here. So to do that, I'm just going to go into node edit mode. I'm actually going to turn the smart cursor on. That will guide me to where I want to position my node. So I'm going to take this node here and I'm just going to follow that along the horizontal line there till I get to the point where we meet with the original node here. Okay, so I know that this is now in line with the point on the other side of my cross section, and we've now created the leg for our cross section there. So let's put that into normal selection mode, and with that selected, I'm going to hold down shift and we're going to select this vector here, and then we're just going to close them by moving the endpoints to a common point there. And so now if we just use the option here to zoom to fit, we're going to take that component, we're just going to delete it, and then we're going to go into the two rail sweep form. I'm just going to select this vector here, press N on the keyboard to go into node edit mode, and I'm just going to delete those extra points that we put in earlier, like so. And we just click into the white space, right click to come out of node edit mode, select the outer vector, shift and select the inner vector, use selection, then we're going to apply this cross section here, right mouse click, we're going to add that cross section to all of the rail nodes, press apply, and then we're going to give that a name. I'm going to call this one frame and apply that. And if we take a look in the 3D view, and we can see that that vertical edge is on the outer rail. So to swap that over, let's just simply right click on one of the rails and use the option to swap rail order, press apply, and we can see now that that vertical edge is now on the inside. The last option that we're going to look at is this option here to fill center of inner closed vector rails. And so what that will do, it will basically fill the inside of our shape with the height of the inside edge. And so if we just check that and then use the option here to apply that, if we just maximize the 3D view there, you can see it's just filled that with the height that we had in the inside edge of the rail there. And so that finishes the guide to the two-rail sweep. Now there are many tutorials that demonstrate the two-rail sweep being used in working projects, and you can find them in the related video section for this tutorial in the tutorial browser.